I'm Vivian Brandt, 53 years old, and I command every SEAL team in the United States Navy. For 30 years, I gave everything to a service that did not always want me, and to a father who measured my worth by a gold pin I was never allowed to earn. But the morning a young instructor grabbed my ankle on the butt-ass grinder and tried to fail me out in front of no one, I finally understood what all of it had been for. Have you ever been dismissed by someone whose respect you would have given anything to earn? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand quietly in the truth after someone tried to make you small, hit that like button and subscribe. The summer I turned 12, my father held court at our kitchen table on the first Saturday of every month, and the whole house arranged itself around him like iron filings around a magnet. His old teammates would come by, men with forearms like mooring lines and laughs that rattled the windows, and they would drink coffee until midnight and tell the stories I was not supposed to be awake to hear. I would sit on the stairs in the dark, knees pulled to my chest, and I would memorize the shape of his voice when he talked about the water. My father was a frogman. To me, at 12, that was the same thing as being made of something the rest of us were not. We lived in a Navy town where the ocean was always close enough to smell, and in our house there was exactly one thing that conferred worth, and it was a small gold pin. The trident. My father wore it the way other men wore wedding rings, like proof of a vow that organized his entire life. He had earned it in 1968, come up through the underwater demolition teams when they were still called that, and he carried himself for the next 50 years like a man who had paid a price the rest of us could only imagine. I built him a model boat that summer. I spent 3 weeks on it, sanding the hull, getting the waterline straight, painting the numbers on the bow with a brush so small it had maybe 4 hairs. I carried it to the kitchen table during one of those Saturday gatherings, and I set it down in front of him with my heart going like a bird against a window. He glanced at it. He said, "That's nice, kiddo." And he slid it to the edge of the table without picking it up, and he went back to the story he was telling. One of the other men, a chief named Patterson, actually lifted it and turned it in the light and told me the waterline was perfect. My own father never touched it. That was the thing about him. He loved me. I have never once doubted that he loved me. But he only spoke one language, and it was a hard one, and the vocabulary was very small. There were the men who had earned the pin, and there was everybody else who carried their gear. I learned the grammar of that language before I learned to drive. My older brother Dale learned it too, only he learned it from the inside. Dale was 3 years ahead of me, and on Sunday afternoons, our father would take him out to the garage where the shadow box hung on the wall, the glass case with the frogman insignia and the trident and the faded ribbons arranged on dark velvet. Dad taught Dale how to shine the glass with a soft cloth and a little vinegar, how to do it without leaving streaks. When I reached for the cloth once, 8 years old and desperate to be useful, my father took it gently out of my hand and gave it back to Dale. He did not say a word. He did not have to. The line had been drawn, and I was on the wrong side of it, and I had not even been told there was a line until I was already standing across it. My mother saw all of it. Maureen Brandt was a quiet woman in a loud house, and she had developed the survival skill of the overlooked, which is the ability to keep score privately. There was a shoebox on the top shelf of the hall closet behind the spare blankets, and over the years it filled up with the things my father never looked at. My spelling bee ribbon, a newspaper clipping when I made the regional swim finals, a photograph of me in my graduation gown. She would slip these things into the box when no one was watching, the way you might hide money for a rainy day, and once, when she caught me seeing her do it, she put her finger to her lips, and then she touched my cheek. "Your father loves you," she told me that day, folding laundry that did not need folding so she would have something to do with her hands. He just only knows one language, and it is a hard one to speak. Don't wait around for him to learn a new one. You go be whatever you're going to be, and I'll keep the proof right here. I did not understand, at 8 or 12 or even 16, that she was giving me the most important advice of my life. I thought the answer was to try harder. I thought if I could just hand him the right achievement, the one that finally fit the shape of the thing he respected, he would look at me the way he looked at the men on those Saturday nights. I spent a long time being wrong about that. The night I turned 18, in the spring of 1991, I told them at the dinner table that I was joining the Navy. I had thought about it for a year. I had not told anyone, not even my mother, because I wanted to say it out loud only once it was already true inside me. Dale smirked into his plate. My father set down his fork, looked at me for a long moment, and then he said the thing I would carry around in my chest like a stone for the better part of 3 decades. "You'll be back in a year," he said. "It's a hard life. It's not for everybody." He was not being cruel. That was almost the worst part. He genuinely believed he was protecting me from a disappointment he could see coming, and I could not. He had spent his life in a world that had no room for someone like me, and he could not imagine that the world might change, or that I might be the one to change it. He thought he was being kind. I looked at him across the table, across the gravy and the green beans, and the 18 years of being slid to the edge of the table, and I made a decision that I did not say out loud. I decided that I would not be back in a year. I decided that whatever this cost me, I would pay it, and I would keep paying it, long after the men who doubted me had stopped watching. I did not know yet that the proving would never end the way I wanted it to. I just knew that I was going, and that some part of me was going precisely because he was so sure I would fail. I want to tell you what I learned out there. But to understand the morning on the grinder, the morning everything finally came due, you have to understand the years in between, and the badge I earned that turned out to be the wrong badge. I commissioned in 1995, an ensign at 22 years old, and I chose the hardest thing I could find. Explosive Ordnance Disposal, EOD. If you do not know what that is, the short version is that we are the people who walk toward the bomb when everyone else is running away from it. We render safe the things designed to kill, and we do it with our own hands, often within arm's reach of a device that is one bad decision away from ending us. The training pipeline washes out most of the people who start it. Dive school, then the EOD school, then a parade of qualifications that take years. I wanted my father to understand that I had chosen something that demanded everything. I called home the week I selected it. I was so proud I could barely hold the phone. My father's first question was whether EOD was the bomb stuff. I said yes. There was a pause on the line, and then he delivered his verdict in the flat voice of a man reading a weather report. EOD, so you'll be babysitting other men's bombs? Well, somebody's got to carry the gear. Carry the gear, the phrase he used for everyone who was not a frogman. I had chosen one of the most lethal, most technically demanding jobs in the entire Navy, and he had filed it under the same heading as everything else I had ever done. I remember standing in the barracks hallway with the phone against my ear and a roaring in my head, and I remember deciding not to argue. You cannot argue someone into respecting you. I had not learned that lesson yet, but I had started to feel the shape of it. I earned the EOD badge in 1997, 2 years later, a lieutenant junior grade by then. The badge is a wreath with a bomb and lightning, and it is one of the hardest pins in the Navy to put on your chest. I mailed a photograph home. My mother framed it, and at a family barbecue that summer, my brother Dale held up the framed photo for the relatives and captioned it, to laughter, as Vivian's Participation Trophy. "Relax, it's a joke," he said when he saw my face. "You defuse bombs, you don't shoot anybody. It's basically Navy plumbing with extra steps." Navy plumbing with extra steps. I have thought about that line 1,000 times in the years since, usually while doing things that would have made my brother faint. Dale had taken our father's cool, careful dismissiveness and sharpened it into something that drew blood. And he had done it because making me small was the easiest way to feel large in a family where only one currency had value, and neither of us had been minted in it. There was a visit home, somewhere in there, between schools, when I tried one last time to explain it. I tried to describe what render safe actually means. The way time slows down, the way you talk yourself through it in a calm interior voice, while your hands do work that does not forgive mistakes. The math of staying alive. My father listened for about a minute, and then he mentioned that a teammate's son had just earned his trident, and the subject was closed. The comparison was never spoken aloud. It did not need to be. It hung in the room like humidity. That was the night I stopped sending photographs home. I want to be precise about why, because it matters. It was not anger. I was not punishing him. It was self-preservation, plain and simple. You can only hand someone your proudest moment so many times and watch them set it at the edge of the table without picking it up before you learn to stop reaching. So I stopped. I put my head down, and I did the work, and I let the work be the reward, because the work, at least, never told me I did not belong. The bombs did not care that I was a woman. The bombs did not care that I wore the wrong pin. The bombs were perfectly democratic. They would kill anyone. And in the strange way of difficult things, I found a kind of peace out there on the edge of catastrophe that I never found at my father's kitchen table. In 2004, I deployed to Iraq, a lieutenant attached to special operations, and I spent the better part of a year rendering safe roadside bombs in places where the people who built them were often still close enough to watch their work. There was one afternoon outside a town I will not name, a device buried in the shoulder of a road that a SEAL element needed to cross, and the standard tools could not reach it cleanly, and so I did the thing you are trained never to want to do, which is to go down to it by hand. I remember the heat coming up off the dirt. I remember the radio chatter going quiet in my ear because the men had figured out what was happening and did not want to break my concentration. I remember talking myself through it in the calm interior voice you build over years, naming each step out loud inside my own head. My fingers doing work that does not forgive a single mistake. And I remember the silence after, the long exhale of a dozen men who had just watched a woman they had never met walk toward the thing that could have killed all of them and take it apart with her hands. Not one of them ever called me a gear carrier again. They did not care what pin I wore. They had seen what I would do for them. I will not dramatize it beyond that. I will only tell you that I earned a Bronze Star with the Combat Distinguishing Device that year, and that I did not call home to mention it. I knew exactly how that conversation would go, and I had a war to fight, and I could not afford to be slid to the edge of the table while there was work to do. I made lieutenant commander in 2005. I deployed again to Afghanistan in 2010, supporting the Naval Special Warfare Elements directly, the SEAL teams my father worshipped, and I bled a little for it and came home and went back to work. I made commander in 2011 and took command of an EOD mobile unit, captain in 2017. And somewhere in all of that, without ever once getting the phone call I had stopped expecting, I became very good at a thing my father had decided did not count. The relatives kept asking, at the holidays, when I was going to settle down. My father kept asking the teammate's son about his trident, and my mother kept the box. I rose, the way you rise when you stop performing for an audience that has left the theater. I made Rear Admiral, the lower half, in 2021, and the upper half in 2024. And in that same year, I was given command of the entire thing, Naval Special Warfare Command. Every SEAL team in the fleet. The frogmen my father had built his identity around, the men whose pin had cost me a childhood of being slid to the edge of the table, all of them, ultimately, answered up a chain that ended at my desk. I did not call to tell him. By then I understood that the phone call would never land the way I wanted, and I had stopped needing it to. Or I thought I had. That is the thing about a wound you have carried since you were 8 years old. You can build an entire life over the top of it, a magnificent life, a life of medals and stars and command, and still it sits down there in the foundation, waiting. And you do not find out how much it still aches until the morning something presses directly on it. The morning it pressed on it, I was wearing a gray PT shirt with no name on it, and a young man I had never met decided I did not belong on his grinder. Let me tell you about that morning. It was spring, this year, 2026. I had been the commander of Naval Special Warfare for 2 years, and I had developed a habit that made my staff nervous. Every so often, with no notice and no entourage, I would go and stand where my people actually stood. I believe, all the way down to the floor of myself, that you cannot lead men who do impossible things from behind a desk in a motorcade. You have to keep going to the place where the impossible things are practiced before the sun comes up, and you have to be willing to be just a person there, not a flag officer with an aide reading your schedule. So on a Tuesday before dawn, I put on plain Navy PT gear, a gray shirt and shorts, no insignia, no rank, nothing that said who I was. I told my driver to wait off the installation. I walked in through a side gate I was entirely entitled to use, and I stepped onto the edge of the Bud S grinder as the morning evolution was ramping up. If you have never seen it, the grinder is a courtyard of black asphalt at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, open to the sea air, and it is where the men trying to become SEALs are broken down and built back up. That morning it was full. Boat crews grinding through pull-ups on the long bars, 8-count bodybuilders, flutter kicks until the abdomen screams, bear crawls across the blacktop. the instructors moving among them like weather, the smell of salt and sweat and effort. I have loved that smell my entire life. I stood at the edge of it for a moment, a 53-year-old woman nobody recognized, and I felt at home in a way I rarely feel anywhere. I have commanded every SEAL team in the fleet for 2 years, and the only way I know how to lead men who do impossible things is to keep standing where they stand, on the same blacktop before the sun comes up. So I walked to the pull-up bars at the edge of the courtyard, reached up, and began a clean set. Dead hang, full extension, chin over the bar, the way I have done it for 30 years. I was not showing off. I was just doing the thing that the place is for. I did not notice the young instructor watching me until he was already moving. His name, I would learn, was Petty Officer First Class Tanner Voss. He was 30 years old, a SEAL, recently reported to First Phase as an instructor, and he was at that dangerous stage of a young man's career where he has earned something real and has not yet learned what it is actually for. He saw an unfamiliar older woman on his grinder, a woman in unmarked PT gear, with no obvious reason to be there, and his mind reached for the most contemptuous available explanation. A lost family member, a visitor who had wandered loose, some civilian who thought the place was a public gym, and he decided, in front of a cadre he badly wanted to impress, that he would be the one to deal with it. "Who cleared you onto my grinder?" he said, planting himself in front of me as I dropped from the bar. "This isn't a gym, ma'am." I looked at him. I have looked at a great many young men like him over the years, and I felt no anger, only a kind of recognition. I said nothing yet. I reached up and started another pull-up, because I had come to do a thing and I intended to do it, and that, more than any words, was what set him off. A woman he had told to stop, continuing, in front of everyone. What he did next he will regret for the rest of his life. He reached up and grabbed my ankle while I was hanging from the bar, and he yanked, hard, to break my grip and pull me down. It was a small thing and an enormous thing at the same time. He put his hands on me to prove he was hard. And when my boots hit the blacktop, he was already barking, already smoking me, drop and give him push-ups, then flutter kicks, then more, the whole punishing vocabulary of the place, trying to break me and drive me off his grinder. The thing you have to understand is that nobody was watching. The other instructors were running their own boat crews. The students were heads down in their own private oceans of pain. This was happening in one corner of a very loud courtyard, between a young man with something to prove and an old woman he had decided was nobody. And for about 4 minutes it belonged only to us. He leaned down close, the way they do, and he delivered the line that he did not know was the worst mistake of his career. "You're done. I'm failing you out. Off my grinder. You don't belong anywhere near these men." I want you to know what went through me when he said that. It was not rage. It was almost a kind of dark laughter, the laughter of a person who has heard the same sentence her entire life, from people who were so sure of themselves and so completely wrong. He thought the worst thing he could do to me was make me hurt. He had no idea that I had spent my whole life being told I did not belong near these men, and that I had outlasted every single person who ever said it. My father had said it with silence. My brother had said it with jokes. And now a 30-year-old in good shape was saying it with a whistle. And the truth was that I commanded him, and his instructors, and his commanding officer, and every team he would ever dream of joining. I did not tell him that. I did the thing I have always done. I dropped, and I matched the students. Push-up for push-up, flutter kick for flutter kick, my breathing even, my eyes forward, giving him nothing. If he wanted to smoke me, he would have to do it all morning, because I was not going anywhere, and I was not going to use my rank to escape a young man's bad judgment when I could simply outlast it, the way I had outlasted everything else. Across the grinder, the command master chief of the center, a man named Gunner Boyd, finally noticed. He is the kind of senior enlisted leader who can read a courtyard like a page, and he read this one instantly. He saw an instructor putting hands on an unknown older woman and smoking her into the blacktop, and his face went hard, and he started moving toward us fast, ready to end Petty Officer Voss's morning and possibly his career. But Master Chief Boyd did not get there first. The door to the quarterdeck opened, and the commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center stepped out into the gray morning light. Captain Reed Sutherland, a SEAL of 20-some years, a man who had been a young officer in Afghanistan in 2010. in the exact place and the exact months I had been there. A man who had stood in a plywood operations center while I walked out to render safe a device that would have killed a dozen of his teammates. He knew my face. He had known it for 16 years. He saw a 53-year-old woman in a gray shirt being smoked on his grinder by one of his own instructors, and he understood, in the space of a single breath, exactly what he was looking at and exactly how wrong it was. He came to attention so hard, I heard his boots come together from 40 feet away, and then he filled his lungs and called it across the entire courtyard, in the voice they teach you to use when the words have to reach every soul in earshot and stop them where they stand. Attention on deck, Admiral on the grinder. I have heard those words in a lot of rooms. I have never heard them land the way they landed that morning. A whole courtyard of the hardest men in the Navy froze mid-motion. Pull-ups stopped at the top of the rep. Boat crews locked in place. 100 and some men, soaked and shaking and halfway through the worst part of their morning, came to attention and turned to look at a woman in a plain gray shirt standing on the blacktop. And Petty Officer First Class Tanner Voss, who 4 seconds earlier had been smoking me off his grinder, went the color of wet concrete as the word Admiral reached him and rearranged his entire understanding of the morning. I straightened up. I did not gloat. I did not say anything clever. There is a discipline to a moment like that, and the discipline is to take all the power the moment has handed you and to spend almost none of it. Captain Sutherland crossed the grinder and stopped a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said low, "I did not know you were on the installation. I would have met you at the gate." "That's the point, Reed," I said. "I didn't want to be met." He glanced at Voss and his jaw worked, and I could see him doing the math on how many ways this could end badly for the young man. Master Chief Boyd had reached us by then, and he was looking at Voss the way you look at a tool that has just broken in your hand. Voss himself had come to a rigid, bloodless attention, staring at a point in the middle distance, the way men do when they are waiting to find out how much of their life they just set on fire. I want to tell you what I felt, standing there, because it surprised me. I had just been recognized in the most total way a person in my world can be recognized. Every man on that grinder now knew exactly who I was and exactly what I commanded. It should have felt like vindication. It should have felt like the thing I had been chasing since I was 8 years old and reaching for a cleaning cloth my father took out of my hand. It did not feel like that at all. It felt hollow, and I did not understand why until later that night. "Carry on," I said to the courtyard in a voice meant to release them. "These students have a long morning and they don't need to watch grown men sort out who outranks whom. Master Chief, send Petty Officer Voss to see me before I leave. Not as a punishment, as a conversation." Boyd's eyebrows moved a fraction of an inch, which on a man like Boyd is the equivalent of open shock. He had expected me to demand the young man's head, and I had not, and he filed that away. The whistle started again, the boat crews dropped back into their pain, the grinder went back to being the grinder. And I went and did exactly what I had come to do. I walked first phase. I watched the boat crews carry their logs. I crouched next to students during a water break and asked them where they were from and why they had come and what hurt the most, and I listened to the answers. The reveal had changed nothing about my purpose. I had come to see my people honestly, and a young man's bad judgment was not going to stop me from seeing them. If anything, the men were easier with me after they knew, not stiffer. The hardest men in the world relax a little when they realize the person in charge is willing to stand on the same blacktop they bleed on. One of the students, a young man with a split lip and the 1,000-yard look of someone 3 days into the worst stretch of his life, asked me during a water break whether it was true, what the instructors were now saying, that I ran the whole command. I told him it was true. He thought about that for a moment, and then he asked me how I had done it, coming up the way I had, in a Navy that had not wanted women anywhere near this part of it when I started. I crouched down next to him on the blacktop, so we were eye to eye, and I told him the only true answer I have. "I just refused to leave," I said. Every single day somebody gave me a reason to quit. And every single day I decided that today was not the day. That's the whole secret. There isn't a better one. You outlast the people who tell you to go home, and one morning you look up and you're still standing there and they're not, And the place is yours because you're the one who stayed. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when something lands in a place you needed it to land. I have wondered since whether he made it through. I hope he did. I think about that kid more than he will ever know. But that night, alone in my quarters, the hollowness came back, and I did the thing I do when I cannot understand my own heart. I called Lena Marsh. Lena and I went through the EOD pipeline together in the 1990s. Two of a tiny handful of women in a world that had not decided yet whether to let us exist. She made captain and retired a few years back, and she is the one person alive who knew me before the stars, before any of it, when I was just a scared 24-year-old trying to put a pin on her chest. I told her about the grinder, the ankle, the whistle, the word Admiral going off like a flare. And then I told her I felt nothing, and I asked her what was wrong with me. She was quiet for a moment. Lena is never quiet. And then she said the thing I had not let myself say in 30 years. You command every team in the fleet, Viv. A kid grabbed your ankle this morning and a captain called the whole base to attention. And you're sitting there sad. You know why. It's the same reason it's always been. 1,000 salutes from strangers will never be the one nod you've wanted from one old man. You keep collecting recognition like you can melt it down and pour it into the shape of your father, and it never sets. It never will. I sat in the dark with the phone against my ear, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. She was right. I had spent 3 decades gathering up every salute and citation and star like a person, filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom, hoping that one day it would be full enough to count as my father's approval. It was never going to be full. The hole was the whole problem. And I was 53 years old, finally hearing it out loud. So what do? I said. You stop pouring, she said. You go see him, not to show him your stars, to say the true thing and put it down. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, and then I opened an email from my mother that I had been letting sit for 2 days. It was a short one. Russell's heart was not good, she wrote. He tired easily now. And lately, she said, he had been going through his old things, the shadow box, the footlockers, the boxes in the garage, the way a man does when he has started to feel the edges of his own life. She did not say more than that. She did not have to. I read it 3 times, and then I closed the laptop, and I understood that the clock I had been ignoring my whole life had a finite number of hours left on it. The next morning, before I flew back to my headquarters, I kept my word, and I had the conversation. Petty Officer Voss reported to the office I had borrowed at the center at 0800, and he came in expecting to be relieved. You could see it in the set of his shoulders. He had spent the night, I am sure, imagining the end of everything he had worked for, and he had come to take his medicine like a man, which I respected even as I had no intention of giving it to him. I did not start with the grinder. I asked him where he was from. I asked him about his deployments, and he had real ones, hard ones. I asked him why he had wanted to become an instructor, and underneath the careful answer, I heard the thing I was listening for, which was fear. The fear of a young man who has finally earned a place in the most demanding fraternity on earth and is terrified, every single day, that he is not actually good enough to be there. And who manages that terror by making very sure everyone around him knows he is harder than they are. I know that fear. I wore it for years. It is the engine of 1,000 cruelties. You put your hands on a stranger to prove you were hard, I said finally. Look at me. Hard is not the job. The job is making sure the man next to you comes home. You grabbed my ankle this morning because you needed the people watching to think you were strong. That is the opposite of strength. Do you understand the difference? Yes, ma'am, he said, and his voice cracked on it. You're going to be a good instructor, Petty Officer Voss, I said. Not in spite of this morning, because of it. Today you found out exactly what it feels like to be completely wrong about somebody. Most men go their whole lives without learning that. Don't waste it. He looked at me then, really looked, and the question came out of him before he could stop it. Ma'am, I tried to throw you off the grinder. Why are you helping me? And there it was, the question that opened the door to the rest of my life. Because somebody decided a long time ago that I didn't belong either, I said. A long time ago, and for a long time, and by people who were supposed to love me. I know exactly what it does to a person to be told they don't belong. I am not going to be the one who does that to you. That's why." He left that office a different man than the one who came in. I have watched a lot of young men grow up over the years, and I can usually tell the moment it starts. It is a small thing, a quiet rearrangement behind the eyes, the moment a person stops performing strength and starts actually building it. It started in him, right there, in a borrowed office, the morning after the worst mistake of his career. Sometimes the worst morning of a person's life is the one that finally makes them. The story traveled, the way these stories do, faster than any official report. By the end of the week, the senior enlisted across the center knew that the admiral had been smoked on the grinder by a new instructor and had protected him instead of burning him down. Master Chief Boyd, who had wanted Voss's head, made quiet Char the cadre understood what I had done and why. And something shifted in how the people who actually run the teams, the chiefs and the master chiefs, the keepers of the real culture, regarded me. You cannot buy that kind of standing with a ceremony. I had earned it by what I did with my power when I had every right to use it as a weapon and chose not to. But the standing was not what I was thinking about as I flew home. I was thinking about a footlocker in a garage and an old man going through his things and a conversation I had been avoiding for 30 years. I booked leave. I booked a flight to the town near the water where I grew up. And I told Lena, when she asked, that I was not going to bring my stars. I was going to go home as a daughter, not as an admiral. And I was going to say the true thing out loud and stop waiting for a phone call that was never going to come. It was the hardest order I ever gave myself. Walking toward a live device is easier than walking toward your father with your hands empty and your heart open. At least with the device, you know what will kill you. My brother called me the night before I flew out. Dale had heard a garbled version of the grinder story from a Navy cousin, and for the first time in our entire lives, the joke would not come to him. I could hear him groping for it on the line, reaching for the old reflex of making me small and finding that it would not fit in his mouth. "Some chief at Coronado is telling people my little sister runs the SEALs now," he said. That's not a real thing, is it?" "Viv, is it?" "It's a real thing, Dale," I said. Naval Special Warfare Command, every team. For 2 years now. There was a silence on the line that contained, I think, 30 years of barbecue captions and plumbing jokes and participation trophy laughs, all of them suddenly turning over in the dark and showing their other side. He did not apologize that night. He was not ready. But the joke was dead, and we both heard it die. I packed a single overnight bag and set it by the door. I did not pack a uniform. For the first time in my adult life, I was going home with nothing to prove and nothing to hide behind, carrying only the truth, which is the heaviest thing there is. While I was in the air, things were already moving in that house by the water in ways I would only learn about later. My brother Dale, it turned out, had spent that whole night on his phone. A man who had reduced my career to a punchline for 3 decades sat at his kitchen table in the dark and finally typed the words, Naval Special Warfare Command, into a search bar, and read what it was, and understood for the first time the size of the thing his little sister had been quietly carrying while he made jokes about plumbing. He read about the teams. He read about the command. He read until the sky went gray, and every laugh he had ever gotten at my expense came back to him with a new and sickening weight. "I spent 30 years making her the joke of every cookout," he said to his wife when she came down and found him there. "And she was running the whole thing, the whole time. How do you say sorry for 30 years? He did not have an answer. There is not a good one. And my mother, while my father slept in the next room, finally did the thing she had been waiting decades to do. She took the shoebox down from the top shelf of the hall closet, the box she had been filling in secret since I was a girl, and she carried it to the dining room table, and she laid out the whole of it. Decades of saved proof. The spelling bee ribbon, the swim clipping, the graduation photo, and the things I had not even known she had found a way to get hold of. The citations, the change of command program with my name on it under the words Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command. She spread it all across the table in the morning light. And when my father woke and shuffled in, looking for his coffee, he saw it laid out in front of him for the first time in his life. "What's all this?" he said. "This is your daughter, Russ," my mother said. She did not raise her voice. After 50 years of being the quiet one, she did not need to. I kept every one of these because somebody in this house had to. Look at them. Really look. That's not gear carrying. That's not babysitting bombs. That's your daughter, and that's all her, every bit of it. And you are going to sit down and you are going to see it before she gets here. My father, the frogman, the man who had measured the entire world by one gold pin for 78 years, sat down at his own dining room table and began, slowly, with shaking hands, to go through the record of the daughter he had never let himself see. The Iraq citation, the Bronze Star with the little bronze phi for valor. The program that named me commander of the very men whose pin had been the sun his whole life orbited. He read them one at a time. He did not say anything for a long time. My mother said his hands were shaking the whole way through, and that twice he had to set a clipping down and take his glasses off and press the heels of his hands into his eyes. There was one clipping, my mother told me, that he went back to 3 separate times. It was a small item from a service newspaper, years old, with a photograph of me in the field in Afghanistan, dirty and tired and laughing at something outside the frame, standing among a group of operators who had their arms around me like I was one of their own. He kept returning to that one. And the third time he picked it up, my mother said, he finally spoke, in a voice she had not heard from him in 50 years of marriage, the voice of a man whose certainty has come apart in his hands. They're holding her like she's theirs, he said. Look at that. Those are the teams. Those are the real ones. And they're holding her like she's one of them. He set it down, and he looked at my mother, and he said the thing that I think broke whatever was left to break in him. She is one of them. She's more than I ever was. And I spent her whole life telling her she was carrying the gear. My mother did not answer him. She told me later there was nothing to say that would have helped, and that the only mercy she could offer was to let him sit in it. Because a man does not change at 78 by being comforted. He changes by being made, finally, to see. He had spent my childhood unable to pick up a model boat. Now he could not put the clippings down. Far away on the grinder he would never see, something else was paying forward. Petty Officer Voss had a struggling student in his boat crew, a quiet, undersized kid named Seaman Recruit Eli Park, who was hanging onto the program by his fingernails. The old Voss, the one from before, would have ground him into the blacktop and called it weeding the garden. But the new Voss, the one who had learned in a single morning what it cost to be wrong about somebody, did the other thing. He pulled Park aside, and instead of breaking him, he taught him. He gave the kid the courage to stay one more day, and then one more after that. The transformation I had started in that borrowed office was already spreading outward into men I would never meet. I landed, and I rented a car, and I drove the familiar roads to the house by the water with my empty hands on the wheel and my heart going like a bird against a window. Exactly the way it had the day I carried a model boat to my father's table 41 years before. Dale met me on the porch. He looked terrible, like a man who had not slept, which he had not. He started talking before I was even up the steps, the words tumbling out of him sideways and clumsy, a man who had never once in his life apologized for anything trying to build the machine from scratch in real time. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I was wrong. About all of it. The jokes, all of it. The whole 30 years of it. I didn't know what you were, Viv. And the truth is, I didn't want to know. Because if you were that, then what did that make me? I made you small so I wouldn't have to feel small. That's the whole ugly thing right there. And I'm sorry. I don't know how to say it bigger than that." I looked at my brother, 56 years old and falling apart on a porch, and I felt the bucket I had been carrying my whole life, the one with the hole in the bottom, finally get set down. I was done collecting debts. I had been done since a phone call in the dark with Lena Marsh. "You were my brother," I said. "That's all I ever actually wanted you to be. Not my admirer, my brother. You can still be that. We have time." He cried then, my hard older brother, the king of the cookout, and I held him on the porch of the house we grew up in. And over his shoulder, I could see my mother standing in the doorway with her hand over her mouth and her eyes shining. Finally getting to stop being the silent keeper of the box and getting to simply be a mother whose children had found their way back to each other. She hugged me in the kitchen and she said it out loud, for the first time in front of everyone, the thing she had only ever whispered. "I am so proud of you. I have always been so proud of you. And I am so glad I lived to say it, where everyone could hear." And then there was my father. He was sitting in his chair in the front room, smaller than I remembered, the way they get, and the clippings were still spread on the dining table behind him where he had left them. He looked at me for a long moment, and I braced, the way I had braced my whole life, for the slide to the edge of the table. It did not come. "Walk out to the garage with me," he said instead. "There's something I want to show you." I followed him out to the garage, where the shadow box hung on the wall, the glass case I had been forbidden to touch as a girl, the Holy of Holies. He stood in front of it for a while, breathing, gathering himself. And then, with hands that shook, he worked the little catches and took the back off the case I was never allowed near. He reached inside, past the trident, past the ribbons, and he took out a small, scuffed, tarnished pin from the corner. The original underwater demolition team frogman insignia. The first one. The one that started everything, in 1968, when he was a young man becoming the thing that would define him. He turned and he took my hand, my 53-year-old hand that had rendered safe more bombs than he could count, and he pressed the old frogman's pin into my palm and closed my fingers over it. The man who had said, "Trident or nothing," for 78 years, was giving his bomb disposal daughter a frogman's pin. "I only ever knew how to measure a person one way," he said, and his voice was not steady, and he did not look away from me, which cost him something I will never fully understand. "I was wrong about the measuring. I want you to hear me say that. I was wrong about the measuring. I was never wrong about you. It just took me too long to figure out those weren't the same thing. Way, way too long. I'm sorry, Vivian. I'm so sorry it took me your whole life." I closed my hand around that battered pin in the dim light of the garage, 53 years old, and I held in my palm the thing my father had never been able to say, and now had finally found a way to give. I did not need it anymore. That was the strange and beautiful part. I had stopped needing it a week earlier, in the dark, on the phone with Lena. But getting it anyway, after I had stopped needing it, was a different kind of gift entirely. It was not the approval I had chased. It was something better. It was the truth, given freely by a man who could finally see. I did not fix everything that day. That is not how it works, and I will not pretend otherwise. My father's heart was still failing. The 30 years were still 30 years. But we lived after that in a new and gentler understanding, and that is more than most people ever get, and I knew it. Time passed. I went back to Coronado a few weeks later for an official change of phase event, and this time I came in uniform, through the front, expected. I stood on the quarterdeck and watched first phase the way a commander is supposed to, openly, and I saw Petty Officer Voss running his boat crew with a kind of steady decency that had not been there before. He caught my eye across the grinder, and he gave me a short, sharp, respectful nod. The nod of a man who had become better, and I returned it, and neither of us needed to say a word about the morning that had changed us both. My mother called me most evenings now. My father was weaker, she said, but lighter, somehow, as if setting down the thing he had carried about me had taken weight off him too. He had taken to keeping one of my clippings on his nightstand. "He shows the nurse your picture now," my mother told me, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. "Tells her his daughter runs the frogmen, tells everyone who'll hold still. I never thought I'd hear him say it. I know you didn't either." And on the grinder, the kid was still hanging on. Eli Park made it to the edge of Hell Week, the crucible that ends most of the men who attempt it, and the night before it began, he was sitting on a curb with his head in his hands, one decision away from quitting. Voss found him there, and instead of a speech about being hard, the new Voss told him a story. He told him about the morning an admiral got smoked on this very grinder by a young instructor who thought he knew who belonged, and how that admiral never said a word, just kept matching the students rep for rep, and how she could have ended that instructor with a sentence and chose instead to teach him. "You want to know who belongs here, Park?" Voss said. "It's not the loudest guy on the blacktop. It's not the hardest looking. It's the one who keeps going when somebody tells them to quit. The one who's still there in the morning. I learned that from somebody who could have ended me and chose not to. Now you're going to go in there tomorrow, and you're going to be the one who's still there in the morning. You hear me?" The story had become a lesson, passed down from a woman in a gray shirt to a young instructor to a struggling kid on a curb. The way the real things always get passed down, hand to hand, in the dark, before the sun comes up. The evening before Hell Week, I walked the beach near the center alone, at dusk, the frogman pin in my pocket where I had taken to keeping it. And I took stock of my whole life. I did not know how much time my father had left. But for the first time since I was 8 years old, the relationship was not a wound I was bracing around. It was just a relationship now. Imperfect and aging and real, and I could hold it without flinching. That, it turns out, is what peace actually feels like. It is not the absence of the old pain. It is the moment the old pain stops running the show. Hell Week came, and it did what it does. Most of the men who started it did not finish it. The grinder filled with the sound of the bell that men ring when they quit, the bell that ends the dream, and one by one a lot of them rang it and walked away. And there is no shame in it, because the thing is designed to be unsurvivable for almost everyone. Seaman recruit Eli Park did not ring the bell. At the end of it, soaked to the bone, hollow-eyed, swaying on his feet, more dead than alive, he secured from the final evolution still standing. And I was there. I had made sure to be there. And when they handed out the brown shirts that mark a man who has made it through to the next phase, I was the one who handed Park his. A rear admiral, the commander of all of naval special warfare, putting a brown shirt into the shaking hands of a kid who had almost quit on a curb. Nobody can take this from you now, Park, I told him quietly, just for him. Not a single soul on this earth. Not the loudest guy on the blacktop, not the people who told you you didn't belong. Nobody. Especially not the ones who told you you didn't belong. You earned it. It's yours. Hold on to that. He could barely stand, but he nodded, and something passed between us that I had spent my whole life waiting to feel from the other direction, and was now, somehow, getting to give. The letter came a few days after I got home. It was 2 pages, in my father's shaky hand. And it was the letter I had stopped expecting somewhere around my 30th birthday. He had written it, my mother told me later, because he could finally say on paper what he had never been able to say to my face, and because he had started to feel he might not have many more chances. I will not read you all of it. It is mine. But I will give you the part that I have read more times than I can count. I spent my whole life thinking a pin made the man, he wrote. I built everything I was around that one idea, and I taught it to my children, and I used it to keep my own daughter at the edge of the table for 40 years. You made me ashamed of how long it took me to learn that a pin doesn't make anybody. A pin just marks the place where the work started. The work is the thing, and nobody I ever served with did harder, braver, finer work than you. I am proud of you. I should have led with that, your whole life. I'm leading with it now. Your father. I sat with that letter for a long time in the quiet of my own home, a 53-year-old woman who commanded every SEAL team in the fleet, crying over 2 pages from an old man by the water. Not because I needed them, because I no longer did, and they came anyway. Months on, there was a family gathering, the kind of cookout that used to be a minefield I crossed with my armor on. And at some point, a cousin's new husband asked Dale who I was. And my brother put his arm around me, and instead of the old joke, instead of the participation trophy or the plumbing line, he said, "This is my sister. She's a rear admiral. She commands all of naval special warfare, every SEAL team in the Navy." And he said it with his chest out, and he meant every word, and my mother across the yard was glowing like a window with the sun behind it. I wore the old frogman pin on a thin chain at my collar that day, an EOD officer carrying a frogman's blessing, and nobody had to ask what it meant, because the people who needed to know already did. Let me tell you the last thing, and then I will let you go. The other morning, before dawn, I went back to the grinder. Not as an inspection, not on anyone's schedule. I just put on a gray PT shirt with no name on it, and I walked out onto the blacktop while a new class ground through the dark, and I went to the pull-up bars, and I did my set. Dead hang, full extension, chin over the bar, the way I have done it for 30 years, and the way I intend to do it until my body refuses. The salt air, the smell of effort, the young men around me chasing a thing that will cost them everything and give them back something they cannot name. And I want to say this to you, whoever you are, wherever you are tuning in from tonight. If you have spent your life handing your proudest moments to someone who would not look at them, I want you to hear me. You do not need their eyes to make it real. The work was always real. The medals, the miles, the quiet courage nobody clapped for. All of it was real the whole time, with or without their approval. And the day you stop reaching for it, the day you stop pouring recognition into a bucket with a hole in the bottom, is the day you finally get to keep your own. That is not revenge. I never wanted revenge. That is just peace. And the thing nobody tells you about peace is that it was always yours. It was always sitting right there under the wound, waiting for you to stop bleeding long enough to notice it. I pulled myself up to that bar one more time in the dark, in the salt air, belonging to it completely, needing no one's permission to be exactly who I am. And for the first time in my whole life, that was enough, because it was always supposed to be. If you've ever worn the wrong pin in a family that only respected one, if you've ever handed someone your proudest moment and watched them set it down without looking, I would love to hear your story in the comments. Did you keep reaching for their approval, or did you find a way to set the bucket down? Was there ever a moment when the person who doubted you finally saw the truth? And if someone you loved took too long to say the words, were you able to forgive them when they finally did? If this story found you tonight, leave a comment and subscribe and stay a while. I read every single one,